Hey everyone! So after V-Dread 1 SWS, and just in general, there's been a lot of talk on if V-Dread, the slider one, is actually better than the Crab Dread, and I feel like I don't have too much to say about this topic, but I'll try to get into it here. I have done a video prior talking about V-Dread's slowness problem, so you can check that out somewhere on this channel if you want a little more preamble on this. But I figure for now, I'd start by talking about the three things that V-Dread does better than Crab Dread. So let's get the super obvious and boring one out of the way, which is Suction Bomb is better than Curling Bomb. You guys might remember the story of Crab Stamper, where Crab Stamper doesn't get picked, even though it has a definitely better special, because the Burst Bomb is simply so much better than the Toxic Mist. And in this case, Booyah Stamper is actually doing better than V Stamper, because the kit is more comparable to it across the board. Dread just seems to be another clear example of this, where Curling is kind of bad on it. But, you know, the Suction is a lot better. And so, the sub-weapon gap can help matter, because while Crab is probably still a bit better than Slider, it's, you know, it's not as large a gap to the point where it's worth this downgrade of sub. The downgrade in sub-weapon is larger, and that obviously matters for Dread, especially when the sub can be very important to applying pressure without, you know, committing to slower movement, and it can help you with kill times, and yada yada yada. So, 2 is the Crab nerfs mattered a lot more than we thought. Now, what I mean by that isn't really the Crab 80 damage thing. What I mean by that is Crab is having a really hard time actually staying up. It's getting shredded, it's getting pushed from multiple angles, and it's happening a lot more frequently, and that's because of a lot of other meta shifts I'll talk about right now. But that is especially bad for Dread, because Dread cannot fight well out of its Crab unless if it has prior damage, where even then it has a slow wind-up and has to likely hit 2 of its bullets. So it can be tricky to deal with that. There's a lot of fast pace, there's a lot of things that break it now, because Booyah and Strike are now, you know, touch of death specials against it. And so because of that, pretty much all the specials you're fighting with Crab are pretty good at dealing with you in one way or another, and you have to worry about that. And so because of that, what's the Crab weapon we've been seeing with good success still? And that's Dually, a weapon that doesn't really focus on a lot of Crab, has a very good sub-weapon, and most importantly, Dually can just dodge roll out of its Crab. It's much better at fighting out of it than pretty much any other Crab weapon in the game, which I think is a big advantage for it. So that is obviously a factor that I feel is worth noting. But all of this is getting around the overall meta trends. So in patch 10.0, or not 10.0, in patch 9.0, the meta did shift overall faster. You know, mostly as Neo Splash changed for V Splash, and we've seen that same trend with V Splash switching for more aggressive supports generally. Anyway, so let's talk about that faster pacing that we've been seeing, right? Obviously, with the support being more of a Slayer, there's a lot more drawn-out fights, and in these, like, longer, drawn-out, more fighting-focused environments, being able to hold angles, being able to stall at your death for kill weapons is all very important stuff, and if you can't do any of that, then your support weapon might, like, better be very good at having some kill threat itself. Another area where Dread kind of struggles. Dread is obviously, you know, with the Crab Dread, is obviously a lot closer to something like Neo Splash in terms of playstyle than something like Dually, and that is, you know, ultimately just a factor of the weapon. You could try to play it more aggressive, and, like, I have, and I'm sure other people have, but, like, the toolkit you are given is just simply not good at doing that. You're not going to get as much out of your toolkit if you're playing that way. Why not play the toolkit that can actually play that way? Because as much as people want to say Dread is nothing but a zone cheeser, Dread is probably one of the more aggressive supports in the game, the Slider Dread, because Slider is very combat focused. It's about pulling, getting angles, dealing damage, and so Dread plays off of that damage very well by going for kill confirms and playing with teammates. It obviously is better at holding space than walking into new space. It's a slow AoE weapon, but still undeniably plays more up sometimes. So, because of all of that, another trend we've been seeing is specials that are very good for being in the middle of a fight. Booyah's like okay at it, it gets shot, but it's kind of fast enough to deal with that problem now. But compared to something like Crab or even something like Strike, think about how good it is to pop a bubble on a fight. Think about how instant the value is to pop a stamp and then just throw it after you're done with it. Think how good even a Reef Slider is towards that, even if it's not as common. So, having specials that can utilize the good positions you have or utilize momentum in a team fight and snowball it into a full fight win are generally more valuable now and more popular now. Entry specials are still something you want in your comp, but they're something you want less of in your comp. And a lot of the fighting weapons happen to have more entry specials. So if you're playing a Bucket, you have Strike. If you play a Stamper, you have Booyah. If you're playing, like, with a, what's it called, what am I forgetting? S-Blast, you also have a Booyah. that kind of stuff is a bit more tricky, where you can maybe stack on those too much. The only exception to that really is Mint, and it's just one of the many indirect shifts that makes Mint so good right now. Mint does actually have this middle fight combat tool that works very well for it. So with all that being said, then yeah, I think it's very, like, fair to look at all of those environmental shifts and look at all the changes and be like, yeah, okay, it's probably more worth it to have Slider Dread at the end of the day. And personally, just from playing it in these kind of, like, top-level matches in the Western scene, and from obviously watching Grand Roll play in Japan, for the most part, I see the same thing. There are definitely some maps where Slider just unfortunately kind of sucks, where it can't really find a lot of value. And once you get to something like that, then yeah, obviously there's going to still be a handful of maps in the game where the Crab Dread is just going to be better, because Slider is a much more inconsistent special based off of that. I also think, though, that Crab Dread can have a little bit more value based on the comp you're playing. Now, I don't have a recent VOD of this, but a while ago I played Crab Dread with, like, Rapid, Sword, and Mint. I think that worked for a few reasons. One, like, the Stamper and Mints could ultimately be more aggressive. You had more mid-combat tools, but also, as an anchor, Rapid goes in and fights with your Crab, which allows the Crab to anchor more, makes the static positioning of Dread much less of a problem, and ultimately it's just, you are still having, like, a more aggressive comp, but it's the cooler weapon that's covering it now. Maybe Edit could be the same thing, but even Edit is a lot slower than Rapid, in my opinion. So I still think there are potential for comps where Crab Dread is better. I honestly really want to play the Double Sword Crab Dread Rapid stuff again, personally. However, I do think there's still, you know, kind of, like, few and far between in this case. I feel like most of the comps you're going to be seeing are going to be better for Slider Dread. And so, yeah, I do think it's overall better. I personally really enjoy stuff like the Rapid comp, but if the points for special doesn't get changed, or if there's no similar cooler weapon introduced, then I don't really think things are going to shift that much. And, yeah, I think it's fair. I wish Crab were a little bit stronger at dealing with some of this stuff, or I wish Carly was a bit better at combat. But I still think Crab Dread's, like, good enough to where I do get to play both, and I'm kind of fine with that at the end of the day. So, yeah, I mean, I think this has been very interesting. It's definitely, like, re-solidified the idea of, like, hey, the more fighting-focused supports really are that important, to the point where even with the sheer amount of Crab output Dread has with its Crab kit, this is still more worth it if it means just keeping up the pacing and fighting power just that little bit extra. So it's very much a testament to the direction the meta is going in right now and just how important that is, which I do find really interesting in terms of, like, thinking what could come next. I also think it just matters when talking about Dread specifically. Like, if you look at this weapon's main flaw, again, it's being killed very quickly, and there's more rushdown options. So Crab Dread is in more situations where it's being ran down, and it has to find a way to kill or get out of the opponent's range more quickly, and, you know, when it comes to that situation, you know, these two tools are simply much better at that job than anything else. So I think the main change is I really do notice myself playing a lot more forward in positions, which again just reinforces the idea that you really need something like Rapid that can be more forward for you if you're going to play the other kit. So yeah, that is all my thoughts on this weapon. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.